Hey guys, today is June 27th, 2013. I'm going to get started. So earlier today, Casey asked me in a text what I do when I'm not working. I have a two-part response, and here's the first part, which is considerably briefer than the second part. You'll see why. I write for an hour before I go to bed. I jog around the battlefield, and I would be showing you guys like little video clips of this stuff if it weren't for the fact that I hadn't thought of the format for this video or what I was going to talk about until about 3 minutes ago. So you're going to have to imagine what this stuff looks like. I walk into town to visit Bob, the owner of a small store that is a throwback to the 60s and 70s, and from which I have purchased multiple records, vinyl records. Or I go into town to enjoy a large mug of coffee at the Ugly Mug Cafe while I read a book, and I do the latter activity almost every day. I play chess against my computer, the computerized chessboard, what was previously every Wednesday night and is now every Friday night, due to reasons I will explain later. I read a smattering of French every day, and currently I'm reading L'Étranger by Albert Camus. And I meditate I meditate 4 times a day in 15 to 30 minute sessions. So that's the first part of the response. The second part of the response is this. I also do a lot of thinking, as you can imagine. And prior to recording this hastily thrown together video, I started writing down all of the things I was thinking about. And I didn't elaborate on them because to do that would have taken an unbelievably long amount of time. So I'm just going to list these things. Maybe I'll elaborate on them in a future video, and I'm sorry if I'm tilting the camera. I haven't really been aware of my arm, but here we go. Lately I've been thinking, and I wrote this as like a stream of consciousness thing, sort of, as best as I could, and I wasn't really concerned with grammar or how everything lined up with each. I wasn't really concerned with how well everything lined up or how well everything was connected. So, take it as it is. Lately, I've been thinking, or at least trying to think about consciousness, what it means to be human, what it means to be an intellectual, the impact of reading upon individuality, what a person's need for individuality says about their ego, the instability of the ego, the shallowness of the everyday world, the clutter that is second-hand knowledge, the doubtful truth of the statement knowledge is power, and the far more appealing notion that understanding is power, parentheses, understanding in this context carries the definition of, quote, having the knowledge to use one's knowledge effectively, end parentheses, the ego-crippling fact that I know more about history and French and math than I do about myself, the dangers of ambitions, the usefulness of having ambitions, what my ambitions really mean if there is something greater than this life, parentheses, if it is possible to transcend the mundane, the fast-paced, whirring chaos in my head, how Buddhism is advertised as being good for the body and mind, and how I and other people gobble up the promises of its benefits. Why I ought to bother thinking anything, since everything's already been thought. Why I ought to bother writing, since everything's already been written. The possibility that other people might be just as confused and lost as myself. If the idea of being lost perpetuates one's lostness, the sense that I've lost something vital, and a nagging awareness of that mindset's self-perpetuating nature, or untamed nature. How it hurts to think that I'm like everybody else, and how I feel like I should feel differently. What right do I have to think that I'm great, or that I'm going to do great things when other people don't have that idea? Or perhaps they do. What right do I have to be presumptuous? What right do I have to undermine myself? To what extent does my imagination inform my reality? Where is the boundary between imagination and reality for anyone? The the overabundance of sensory stimuli, and whether I ought to work on controlling it, accepting the fact that my mind's not nearly as powerful as I like to think it is, and grappling with the question of pursuing goals for the sake of pursuing goals when life is short, ought we to aim for material gains, like getting a degree or entering a certain profession, or is there something more stable, more transcendent to strive for? End parentheses. Working on turning my mind into a sharp tool and struggling to reconcile that desire with the desire to respect other people. But how can I do that when I wish to be on top? The need to anchor myself so I'm not caught in a whirlwind of anxiety and self-obsession and depression and other emotions. and the embarrassing and humbling realization that my ability to empathize with other people, I think, has been sadly neglected. Parentheses. Perhaps empathy is incompatible with intellectual superiority. Perhaps it is more important to understand a person's position than to argue against it. At the same time, though, making efforts to understand a person's position stumps the ability to understand one's own. But it also renders the considerate individual unable to place their own beliefs before another's. The problem here is the better/worse black-white mentality. Both positions are equally valid. Perhaps these instances should not be taken so seriously, but more of as an intellectual game, key to respecting both positions, and parentheses. And the reality that I'm uncertain of the principles guiding my writing. David Foster Wallace was driven by a need to address the fragmentation of society and to provide hope for people living in a world that has been intoxicated with entertainment and has been deprived of substance. Edgar Allan Poe wrote poetry to address, quote, his deep worship of all beauty, unquote. What the devil is my central concern? Ought I to have one? Spinning out of control, I can feel words and ideas emerge from the depths of my consciousness and rapidly bring themselves to the forefront of my awareness, and by the time I've registered them, other thoughts have surged to take their place. And there are also some other things thoughts that have come up in my day-to-day life that I ponder and think about when I'm not doing other things, which the other things, I guess, might be a distraction, or might be distractions from these problems. Well, okay. Casey, you asked, and that's the answer that you get. That's the stuff I think about, and that's the stuff that I do. I hope to hear responses from people, meaning Will, because I think he's the only person who actually watches these now. I hope that other people do, and I hope that other people I hope that other people remember to post once the year begins. So yeah, I'll talk to you guys later, or I'll hear from you at some point.